retreat. That's when they went down to the heel of the boot of Saudi Arabia, and they took over the 12 tribes that we would call the Essenes. These are the people from that Moses and all of these people, these are the tribes of Abraham, okay? They were not Jewish, they were Judeans, and they came out of Yemen. The El came down and conquered them in like 20 minutes, and then forced them over a number of months in this march up the Red Sea to Judea, where they established the Abrahamic kingdom in the what we would now call Israel and Palestine, right? But still, no Jews. None of these people were Jews. They have no genetic connection to the Jewish people at all. Christ, none of these people are in that lineage. These are all people from the house of Shem. So if you're an anti-Semite, you might say evil things about Christ because he's descendant in that long line from the house of Shem, but no Jewish person is. Okay, Jews are descended from the Mongolian people that from Temujin, from Genghis Khan, when he came all the way through seeking the space aliens, fighting the space aliens that eventually took over the Khazarians. It's long and it's complicated in there. Anyway, so when they moved those people up to Judea, they established what's known as a Gans, okay, G-A-N-S in Hebrew. It's always in caps. G-A-N-S is what we would translate, that word is translated as garden in the Bible. Okay, so they established the garden or the Gans of Eden in Judea. This is a magnetic bubble. All right, so
do you have any feel about where we get the deuterium in the water? Why do we have deuterium in our water?
Okay, so this, all right. Okay, so this gets really, all right, from the woo perspective, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'm ready for the over woo, by the way. I'm kind of done with the woo.
All right, so here's the deal. This expeditionary force of the people that we would call the Deva came to Earth, and they were either being pursued. So what we're doing here is, all of us old men, we're not putting our impressions on it. We're saying either or whenever there was a possibility of a branching chain that could account for the motivations of what we think we see in the literature, right? So we think that there was this expeditionary force. We see some evidence that it was 250,000 individuals, very heavily armed, in a mothership, you might say, that stayed up off planet for a while. But that they came down and they conquered India, China, and then eventually spread out through Pan-Eurasia and went over to Mesoamerica and so on. Now, when they first got here, they were either fighting among themselves or they were being pursued by some other group that right after they came here, okay? And it was at that point that the damage to the planet was done. It was at that point that we get the damage in the western part that creates the Sahara. It was at that point that we get the damage that okay, totally denuded Mongolia, right? And that's where we get our all of the radionuclides that show up where they should not.
Right. Okay.
Not only you know, in things like water distributed in ways that it should not physically have ever occurred, but also in land masses where it just shouldn't be there.
And so now that we're moving into here we are now with what's going on now. Who's who in this whole thing? I mean, other than the Khazarians, is there any other? The reason I brought up the Druze is there's this whole story about the Kaluni and the Druze and Abraham Lincoln and Trump and all this and the Kennedys, that there's two that we're not really in a war between nation states, clearly. And it's not just a unified deep state. It's like there's two silent groups in the background here fighting each other for control of this planet. And it seems like there are some, at least, bad guys and less bad guys. I mean, that does seem to be true. I don't know that you know, who knows how good they are, but where does all this, where do you play this? Guys. Yeah, right. I agree with that. That's where I am. I think there are good guys here, but
yeah. Okay, so you're quite correct that it's not nation state war, that there are competing factions. I actually put down three, two major ones and a minor one that is sort of sitting on the side at the moment.
I hope you're going to tell us the third faction. I got two. Who's the third?
Okay,
Who are these guys?
All right, so the way that it lays out here is there's the Khazarian Mafia, the KM, and they own the deep state. Okay, on the other side is what we can call, what I call, the self-organizing collective. All right,
kind of like the Alliance of Generals.
More than that. Okay, no, different than that. Okay, because the original alliance, I don't. Maybe there was a military guy in there, but mostly not. It was political. Okay, but here's where it gets really muddy. All right, so the self-organizing collective forms on November 23rd, 1963, the day after the deep state Kennedy out. Okay. They start doing things, and their first activity that I can see comes in 1964 when they allow Americans to start owning precious metals again. Okay. And then it progresses from there with everything that we've lived through in this long battle. But the long battle began in 1280 AD when the Russians went along with the Turks and the collected Teutonic tribes, and they surrounded all of the Khazarian Empire. They did this little deal and threatened the Khazarian king and made him come on out and talk to him. And they did not go to war. They had been at war, and then they just stopped.
Right. This is King Bulan, the old days. Yeah, got it.
Okay. Since then, the Khazarians went underground, right? The Khazarian Mafia sort of disappeared and subsumed itself in the
from 1050 on. Yeah,
correct. And they disappear over time, but we're still dealing with them in the form of the Khazarian Mafia ruling the deep state now. And the most recent face of the Khazarian Mafia has been the WEF, the World Economic Forum, all of those guys. Okay, now the self-organizing collective, though, is not birthed in 1963, because the self-organizing collective is a or inherits, if you will, individuals that have a long-standing tradition, okay, that they've carried down generation after generation after generation. So Friday the 13th, way the fuck back in the Middle Ages, the Khazarian Mafia, in the form of the Jews that had infiltrated the Catholic Church, take over the Catholic Church and the Pope, and they convinced the Pope